Thank you so much, Professor Arundhakar, for that incredible presentation. I want to turn now to our third speaker, Professor Deepa Kumar. Professor Kumar is an award-winning scholar and social justice activist and a professor of media studies at Rutgers University. Her book, Islamophobia and the Politics of Empire, was critically acclaimed and translated into 5 languages. Dr. Kumar has authored more than 80 books, journal articles, book chapters, and articles, and has shared her expertise through a wide range of media, international and global. Welcome to Professor Kumar.
Thank you so much. So I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to the organizers of this conference for standing up to the intense bullying, for putting in inordinate amounts of time and energy, and never once getting so stressed out as to be frustrated with any of us who are constantly pestering them for Zoom links and this and that. The graciousness, the generosity, and the kindness has been overwhelming. And I want to congratulate them on pulling off such an amazing conference. The way I see it is that by attacking the conference as viciously as they have, the Hindutva movement has not only brought us all together with a deeper appreciation of one another, but also strengthened the resolve of conference speakers and organizers to continue to speak out and do this work. It has also provided valuable opportunities. These include having conversations with university administrators and educating them on who these forces are and what they represent and why they are such a serious threat to academic freedom. University administrators have been confused by the word Hinduphobia, believing that somehow scholars who criticize Hindutva are racist. The attack on this conference has opened the door to educating presidents, chancellors, and provosts about how the Hindu right have appropriated the language of anti-racism to shut down criticism of their Hindu supremacist ideology. I began these conversations when my colleague Audrey Trushke was attacked by these forces, and this conference and the attacks on it and the wonderful website have provided the tools and resources needed to continue this conversation. The other opportunity is to get the story out to the wider media. I have seen and read articles in Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Indian Express, and I believe there are many more such articles and news reports in the global media. And the organizers will be in a better position to inform us about these articles, and perhaps it would be a good idea to post those articles as well on the website. The website also has a multitude of solidarity statements from a dizzying number of organizations, including many who may not have otherwise thought about this issue. The third opportunity has been to educate members of the US Congress. 18 organizations came together to hold a US congressional briefing on the threat to academic freedom posed by Hindu supremacists. In short, the virulence with which Hindu supremacists tried to silence and shut down this conference only strengthened the conference and its impact. Now, I was invited to speak about a recent experience of censorship in India that I have had, as well as about white supremacy and Islamophobia. Now, I myself am not a scholar of Hindutva, although I am familiar with the work of several people who spoke at this conference, as well as others such as Aijaz Ahmed and Achin Banayak. And I've tried to attend as many panels as I could and have been simply blown away by the breadth and depth of the analysis presented by scholars, public intellectuals, activists, and filmmakers. And I will surely incorporate your work into my own going forward. So to start with my own experience, I was invited to give a TEDx talk on Islamophobia for the students at the Manipal Academy of Higher Education in Karnataka. My talk was based on my book, Islamophobia and the Politics of Empire. I was going to talk about the concept of race, how malleable it is, and how anti-Muslim racism functions. The students who invited me were eager to learn these concepts as a way to understand what was going on in India. However, almost as soon as they posted the event on social media, they were barraged by threats from Hindu supremacists. To be clear, the talk was not about India or the BJP, but even discussing Islamophobia was too much for these forces. I was smeared in social media and called a terrorist. And even though the students who were organizing this talk were brave enough to want to carry on, and they were supported by faculty, the vice chancellor eventually canceled the talk. However, something positive has also come out of this canceled talk, which is that I met a group of amazing scholars and activists in a group called INSAF India, which stands for International Solidarity for Academic Freedom in India. They are hosting my talk tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. EST in a new series that they have created called The Missing Lectures. The goal behind it is to host talks and lectures canceled by Hindu supremacist forces and to challenge their attacks on academic freedom. Unfortunately, I suspect that this series will not begin and end with me, but INSAF India will continue to host many more such canceled talks until we become stronger and able to actually take on these forces. So this is the beginning of, as this conference says, a global movement of bringing scholars, activists, public intellectuals, and filmmakers to begin to talk about how to resist and dismantle global Hindutva. Right, on the topic of this panel, I want to say a few words about white supremacy, Hindu supremacy, and Zionism. And even though they are different from one another in terms of the moment of origin, as well as various other factors, these are also movements that share tactics, strategies, and rhetoric. And I want to share three, but there are undoubtedly many more. First is the attempt to silence dissenters. These are all political projects that seek to intimidate and silence those who disagree with them. Now, we know this about Hindutva forces. This has been talked about quite a lot at this conference. So I'm going to say a little bit about Zionists. Zionists have played a similar role in the US and elsewhere, as Noam Chomsky and others have documented. In my own work, I have shown how pro-Israeli forces have smeared dissidents as terrorists all the way back to the 1960s and relentlessly waged psychological warfare campaigns against them, attempting to discredit and to scare these people into silence. More recently, white supremacists and the Christian right have joined these forces, shelving their long history of anti-Semitism in a configuration that I have analyzed as the new McCarthyites. In a nutshell, their role has been to target and build fear and paranoia against imagined threats to the nation in order to create a chilling atmosphere. Two, racism. These are all exclusionary projects and therefore focus on racialized others as enemies to be targeted. Hindutva has targeted various enemies, as we know and as we've heard at this conference, with the sharpest knives directed at Muslims and Dalit, as has been mentioned many times before. I see these as racisms because race itself is a construct. Races don't exist in any biological way, but are mobilized to justify various exploitative, oppressive, and expansionist projects. And races themselves are not stable constructs. They are constantly in process of being made, unmade, and remade based on the historical context from which they emerge. Now, in Israel, Islamophobia did not always exist. In fact, it was, if you go back, to the 60s, it was the PLO and secular Palestinian forces on the left who were racialized as threats. And we know from the work of several scholars, including Israel Shahak, that Hamas, in fact, received Israeli support as a way to counter the PLO as well as other forces. But this changed in the 1980s when the Islamic threat was created and mobilized. As I've argued, there were two important conferences organized in 1979 and 1984 by the Israeli Jonathan Institute that brought together politicians and intellectuals from across the West to frame the discourse of terrorism and to develop policy. The racialized terrorist threat has since animated discriminatory politics through a framework that I've called terrorcraft. While the language of terrorism, of course, has a longer history in India, since 9/11, it has received a boost from the US's global war on terror, not only rhetorically, but also in the legal sphere, with laws in India drawing from the USA Patriot Act and so on. Third, mobilizing patriarchal and heteropatriarchal values. In the US, of course, there is a long history of white supremacists justifying genocide against Native Americans and lynchings of African Americans in order to protect white middle-class female virtue. In Europe, in recent decades, several white supremacist and neo-Nazi groups have similarly constructed Muslim men as super predators and as threats to white women. In India, we heard from conference presenters about the concept of love jihad, which is based on similar logics. And women in turn, Zionist women, Hindutva women, and white supremacist women have played a significant role in upholding this patriarchal ethno-national system of beliefs. Now, it's been really fascinating to hear from Anjali as well as other speakers how there has been a selective and opportunistic appropriation of LGBTQ rights and homonationalism by the Hindutva movement. But of course, they've also explained that this is contingent and contradictory. And that's certainly true of the white supremacist movement in the US. I'll give a quick example. When the far right was attempting to shut down the Cordoba House project in 2010, this was an effort to build a community center several blocks away from the former World Trade Center. A massive far-right configuration tried to shut that down. And at a rally that they organized on September 11th, 2010, by the way, by way of context, those of us who were opposed to them organized our own counter demonstration. We far outnumbered them, I think by 5-1 or something to that effect. But a comrade of our protest went to the far right-wing rally, and this was, who's who of the Islamophobic right from Europe, the US, and so on. And one of the speakers was trying to sort of rally and, charge up the attendees of their rally. And they said, "We stand for women's rights." And everyone went, "Yay." "We stand for democracy." And everyone went, "Yay." "We stand for LGBTQ rights." And there was silence. Because the memo had not yet been distributed as of 2010, that this is going to be the new way in which to legitimize white supremacy and far right-wing politics. But it's a process, right? And it's strategic and it's opportunistic, and it varies with time and place. Now, there's a lot more to be said about overlapping strategies and tactics, as well as actual alliances between these forces. But in the interest of time, I will end by saying that I hope to learn from others who have already started such work and will plan to incorporate this into my own future scholarly and activist work. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conference. I have learned so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Kumar. Our last speaker